Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Dyslexia Jewels, a podcast focusing on the positive of dyslexia and how it can change your life if you let it. Today, we have the most amazing guest. So privileged to introduce and talk to Mr. Comer Yates, personal friend of mine. He is the director of the Atlanta Speech School in Atlanta, Georgia. And I am just thrilled that we have this chance today. Welcome, Comer. How are you today?
I'm great, Mira. Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to this, and Jane as well, of course.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about the speech school in Atlanta and what you guys focus on as an institution.
Yeah, I appreciate this chance, y'all. And well, we're an 83-year-old school, and our focus it has been for those 83 years on literacy acquisition for children who are otherwise going to struggle in that endeavor. And we began as actually a school for children who are deaf. It's a long story, but our founder had a son who was deaf in 1930. And when she was able to move from Birmingham to St. Louis in the early 30s, because she had the financial means by which to do that, for her son to learn how to talk, um, she moved to Atlanta later on in the mid 30s. And her son was in public school, had learned how to speak, and then was confronted by other parents who were saying, "My gosh, how does your son talk? Even though he's deaf, I'd give anything if my child, our daughter, had the same chance." So as a result, she just became morally compelled. And I'm sure there are a number of parents, in your group, Meredith and Jane, who feel like, "Gosh, my child has had a chance, and I wish every child could have a chance." That's where our founder came out, to say, if my child has a voice, then I'm going to make sure I spend the rest of my life that every child can have a voice, regardless of financial circumstances. So she started her school as a free school. And since 1938, when we opened, we've never turned away a family because of financial limitation. So not only is our focus on children learning to read, but it's ensure that's every, I mean, have a voice, but that's every child's right. And today, when we think about having a voice, we view literacy as the path to having a voice. Frederick Douglass said 150 years ago in talking about literacy, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. So
Yes.
our purpose at the speech school, and today our largest population of children we serve are dyslexic. In our ward law school, if someone wanted to look up the speech school, you would see that we have 190 children here from kindergarten through fifth grade who are dyslexic. Then this voice, and we define voice as a child's ability to decide their own future, and also the ability to make the greatest difference possible in the lives of others. I've heard and you were talking, Meredith, about dyslexia being a superpower. Well, I mean, superheroes use superpowers not for themselves, but for others, not to save themselves. And I think a lot of times, if I'm a parent of a child who's dyslexic, I think sometimes schools set too low a bar for our children around, we're going to help your child learn how to decode, or we're going to learn how your child can comprehend text. I think those are too low, way too low a bar. Um, it's not a child who's dyslexic. I mean, of course, we want them to be able to comprehend, to understand what the author meant wrote. But the ultimate goal is for the child to read it and determine what those words mean for me
Mhm.
and who I am and what I believe in and what I'm going to stand for in life. The comprehension is simply a platform. And I know I'm going on too long, but I make this point. And the importance of this platform for a child who's dyslexic is particularly critical, not only for a child or his family, but his or her community or our society. Because children who are dyslexic have struggled in their early years in a way that some other children haven't, who have acquired the ability to read in a way they're not sure even how it happened. Whereas our children who are dyslexic, and our son is dyslexic, he's 26 years old. I mean, through that journey and the hard work to get there and his struggle, um, he has a whole lot of perseverance and resilience, but he also has an incredible amount of empathy.
Yes.
He has no toleration for watching on the sideline as other people struggle in anything, whether it's reading or a job and somebody's struggling in the workforce or just to make it in the world. He has just got a sense of that's not okay with me.
Yeah.
And so a dyslexic child, giving him access to being their best selves means a whole lot more than just what that child's life is going to be like.
I
Anyway, I'll
love that.
stop. But
No, I
that's at the core of anything I would say, and how we think about our stewardship with any child. That's where we start. And
well,
it,
I
uh,
just I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
good gosh, if you didn't interrupt, we'd be going on for 3 hours. So that was a good call on your part, Meredith.
I know you so well. No, I love to talk too, and I feel like sometimes I go on, but it's important information. So everything you said, we just absorb. But you brought up a point about being morally compelled, and I feel like that's something that I wanted to share real quick because Janie and I are one of the reasons why we connect so well is because we do feel morally compelled to do these types of PSAs and types of podcasts to teach parents and to educate parents. And one of the biggest questions that we get all the time is, well, so your child reads backwards? And I think to myself, well, I guess some of them do, but not my children. So will you just kind of explain to the parents out there or the listeners, what exactly are there different types of dyslexia and specifically what kind of is a language dyslexia? Because that's what I have, my children have, and it's hard for me to explain it to people. So I was going to let you do that.
Yeah, and as executive director, my background is not in the science of dyslexia. We have a chief academic officer, and we have other brilliant um, scientists on staff, and we're
Yes.
very lucky to have
Mhm.
close relationships with the people we think are the leading experts in the world relative to dyslexia. We do view dyslexia as a language-based disorder. I mean, that's what the science tells us. How it evidences itself, sort of back to your point, Meredith, can be revealed in many, many different ways. Like you say, well, my child does this or my child does this. And sometimes people will say, well, my child just has straight dyslexia. I
Mhm.
honestly don't know what that means. Um, and again, um, what I think of around dyslexia is that a child might, for example, if somebody says that, a child might be struggling in the moment to decode. And that's how it evidences itself. So you might say the way my child's dyslexia shows itself as this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is my child's dyslexia, because one way we describe it here is that dyslexia for a child looks a bit like an iceberg in the North Atlantic. And above the surface for a second grader, well, above the surface for a 4-year-old might be articulation errors, because a language processing issue um, is demonstrating itself in a child in what a child's output looks like. So if
Yeah.
you think about where you're finding that child's a 4-year-old, you might say, oh, well, that child needs to have articulation therapy, and we'll fix his R's and his L's or whatever it is. And and so there'll be some oral motor speech language work that will fix that articulation. Our son had this is what happened for our son. And he had an articulation issue. A speech language pathologist fixed it. She shaved off the top of the iceberg. But sure enough, he got to be a year older and started being introduced to the symbolism of the language.
Mhm.
And suddenly now there's more of the iceberg has revealed itself. And if you had simply said, okay, let's work on his ability to recognize the symbols, and there are only 26 of them, then you might have shaved off more. But the whole language basis is to go, what is underneath all these things we're seeing, and particularly is going to show itself in struggling to decode in the first few years of elementary school. But what we're thinking about is our goal is not to get Joe or Mary, Evelyn to decode second grade print or even comprehend it. We're thinking about what does this mean for when she's in elementary school. I mean, when she's upper elementary, middle school, high school, college, or graduate school, and in life, what is she? And we follow the work of Dr. Mary Ann Wolf around her work is on construction of the deep reading brain, and her book Read or Come Home. We're thinking about what's this going to mean for who for for this child's identity for the rest of her life, and that sort of let's fix what's in the moment, can really, and I would say particularly for people who have children in early elementary school, the top of the language food chain is written expression, and making sure that the dyslexic child can integrate written expression above the ability to read and comprehend is a really important thing to which to pay very close attention. Because if your child has retrieval or working memory issues that are influencing their input and output in reading, those things are going to demonstrate themselves in written language.
That is huge.
And so you just need to be on the lookout for that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's a big, and Olivia, who also is a graduate of the speech school, my daughter, that is what we're seeing now. It's okay. Yeah, she can read the whole entire chapter. It's now put it in writing, and then help her put those thoughts together and put that into a composition. We're definitely still working on that, but she's doing great. So,
and one thing to help children with, sometimes with that, because if you think of all that's going on, they're decoding, they're comprehending, and they're reflecting or passing over the print to think about what it means to them, and now they're translating onto paper. So getting your child sometimes to narrate what they know can really help, because sometimes children are going to show some sensory issues and some motor skill issues accompanying their dyslexia, where just creating text can be hard. So just asking your child and having your child dictate what they want to say.
Mhm.
And our son, I can remember when he was in fourth grade, did a report on Muhammad Ali, and when he wrote it down. He had two sentences, and I said, cool. Just tell me about Muhammad Ali. Well, I mean, it ended. I dictated 2 pages. So being really careful about having your child, not over demanding, or the child being asked to demand too much of themselves,
Mhm.
and learning these skills for how to organize written language is really one of those things you got to continue after. Well, we've remediated his dyslexia. Well, again, you might remediate the dyslexia, but there's still things on which to build.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great point.
You're talking about, we can talk about dyslexia, but you are putting into words so many things that I feel so strongly about. And when you talked about comprehension, I know me as a child, I felt for years I was denied the ability or the right to be able to comprehend things the way that other people did. And it really, it hurt my self-esteem, and it really hurt me as a person. And those are the things that you're talking about. And I love that you're saying, like, let's get these children to talk. And there's so many different ways that we can do that to pull that out of them. It's powerful. I was curious how you feel that the global pandemic has really compounded the problem that so many children in America are struggling to learn to read.
Yeah, and there was a study out of Yale, and what's particularly alarming about the pandemic, is that the evidence is that it's impacted our struggling readers. Um, based on zip code, race, and ethnicity, that access to alternative services that people have been able to acquire based on their affluence relative, and there's not distribution of the science right now. We don't have a country where that distribution is equalized. People still are in a position to acquire it. And too often our families don't have the means to have that kind of for that acquisition. Well, that's how our school got started. Ms. Ham said, I had all the money in the world to go to St. Louis. My family is wealthy from Charleston. I can move to St. Louis for my child to learn how to talk. But now here in Atlanta, when people say to me, what do I do? And I say, well, move to St. Louis, and they don't have the money to do it. I can't do that. So this, and one thing that I think I would say to your parents who have been in this struggle, if their children have been home learning virtually, I mean, it's a brutal situation, because the one thing we tell parents, Jane, when they arrive here with their child, is that you need to stop being your child's teacher. That the last person in the world your child wants to disappoint is you.
Yeah.
And the trial and error of you not being an expert, you're wanting to help your child is gonna, and I'm sure y'all have had it, the kind of tension and frustration and what can look like anger coming from a child really is just anxiety over letting you down. And so in this last year, parents have been forced back into that role of teacher. And I so much look forward to when our children are all back in school. And what's going to be really important to your question, Jane, is schools are going to have so much more expertise on identifying where they find their children on the first day of school. I mean, there's nothing more brutal for a child who's dyslexic than to have a teacher who doesn't know the science. And too many teachers, our teachers don't know the science because they didn't receive the kind of training they should have received. And back when they learned to read, the whole language approach was being used, and they happened to read despite a poor non-scientific model. So they don't have the framework, but they return to school and they run into the trial and error method with their teacher, and their teacher just adores this child just like you adore your child, and she's trying as hard as she can, or he is. The child very quickly is going to draw the inference, this is my fault. Good gosh, Miss Smith is giving it all she has, and other kids are reading. I'm seeing that. So the only person to blame here has got to be me. The worry about our children and our teachers being ready for each other in August, is one of great concern. I know here in Atlanta, and of course, I know well that the anxiety and depression that can be associated with dyslexia, just neurologically, forget about just life circumstances. Our pediatric emergency rooms in Atlanta are overflowing with children who were clinically depressed and anxious in COVID. And I am very concerned about what happens when children return to school and they struggle at school, and what that's going to do. And what can we do to stand in the breach? What can we do to support our teachers? Really try to help our teachers understand the critical need to build relationships with their children and build the safety, and be very intentional about classrooms where the relationship and connection is exalted over controlling children.
Tell us a little bit about, you were talking about resources. Tell us about the Cox Campus, because I love utilizing that resource. It's available to parents and teachers, correct? And it's a free resource, is that right?
Yeah, and our focus again, we have a free online campus. If you go to Cox Campus, if you just Google it, you'll find it. And we have 155,000 members in 62 countries in all 50 states, and it's parents and educators, and it's also healthcare providers who play people literally in the birthing hospital and in pediatric offices for help children on the path to reading. It's very important that parents leave the birthing hospital knowing and having the agency to engage in what Jack Shonkoff at Harvard calls the serve and return of language, that builds early language so that when children learn to decode, they braid the decoding onto a language foundation. And children who are dyslexic can struggle with, they can have a whole lot of vocabulary. You may have seen that in your children, but retrieval of that language may be hard. So anyway, this campus is for anybody who is in the path of constructing a child's deep reading brain literacy acquisition. And so we have all sorts of courses for teachers and parents of children birth through third grade, which is, the really critical window for building a reading brain. And you keep hearing me talk about building or constructing a reading brain. It's important to know that none of us have a single gene in our bodies to read. It is not a natural neurological function for us. There was no need to read to thrive until 1440, and Gutenberg mass-produced print. And so the reading circuit is a novel one, artificial one, constructed by using more primitive circuits, the auditory and visual circuit, and other parts of the brain. And so when you're dyslexic and you're part of this reading brain construction, that's particularly challenging. But the Cox Campus is a place to go. And it's not just for parents or teachers of children who are dyslexic. We have a illiteracy epidemic in our country that extends far beyond, if somebody like Sally Shaywitz might say that 20% of our children are dyslexic. In Atlanta, only 30% of our children are proficient readers. So, and because of lack of access to educational opportunity. So the reading crisis is much broader than the dyslexia crisis.
No,
But it's all part of the same science. The science of teaching a child who's dyslexic to read is the science that's driving all education reform for literacy in our country.
Yes, and I feel so thankful that Georgia has, I'm not sure if they've started the pilot yet because of COVID, but pilot for the kindergartners to be screened for dyslexia.
Right.
That bill was passed, so that was a big plus for Georgia.
And then the issue becomes, Meredith, finding the right screener, because many screeners depend on the teacher's knowledge of to be able to score a screener, to understand children's mistakes, and we have not trained our teachers adequately to do that.
That's a good point. Janie, did you have any
We're
other
working on
questions?
it. We've got the best minds in the country. And I
Yes.
think we really have reached an inflection point, because the science of what to do is not, there's no dispute about the science of how to remediate it, and how to teach reading for all children and children who are dyslexic. The question is just our national will to do it. And there are many school systems that just don't even recognize dyslexia.
Right.
So, parents, the science is there. It's about distribution of the science.
Well, that was
Sorry, Janie, I think Jane, you might have had a question. I don't know.
Do you have a question? I feel like I'm asking all the questions today.
Oh, no.
I'm so excited to have him here.
I know, it's so wonderful. I'm going to ask you a question, and you may or may not have the answer, but it's one that I'm in a lot of dyslexia mom groups. And the biggest question has been, as some of the kids are going back to school here in Wisconsin, my child is crying, my child is throwing a fit, they don't want to go back to school, I am trying to bribe them, a new school shirt. And I mean, the moms are just desperate. Their kids, some of them don't want to go back. They're feeling that anxiety so bad. What could you say to them?
Yeah, what I'd say is they don't want to fail, is what, and they don't feel safe. In children, there's great work for y'all who are listening, Dr. Renee Boynton Jarrett, who we think is the world's authority on trauma-informed practices with children, and going back to school for a child who's dyslexic is trauma. And what Dr. Boynton Jarrett talks about, to even get to the cognitive space to help a child who's dyslexic to remediate. And really, when you're working with a dyslexic child, we never would have said this 10 years ago, but you're rewiring a child's brain. You're certainly wiring, and in a good way, because you're still all the benefit. You're trying to make the circuit for reading more efficient while continuing all those great strengths that come with being dyslexic, because other parts of the brain are part of that system, become part of the system for a child who's dyslexic. That you can't get to that work. Dr. Boynton Jarrett would say, if a child doesn't feel safe and she's in a school where being right or wrong is exalted, she's not going to be able to get past the neurons in her brainstem where she's in a fight or flight mode. And those children who are crying, they're in that mode. And unless a school becomes a place where you get past the brainstem and through the limbic system by creating trust, you don't have a chance to remediate. I mean, it would be like the parable, and any religions are like, trying to grow the healthy seed on the rocky path. It's not going to happen. So, parents really making, asking the hard questions around, what is your school doing to make learning for my child safe? Is the first question. Before they ask what reading program you're using, what are you going to do to make my child safe? Because brain development construction comes from teachers who are asking children to do tasks that are right on the periphery of a child's proficiency, not something that's random that they may or not. And that's where the precision comes in, because you really want to be in a space where a teacher asks a child, why do you think? And the child goes, I've never heard that question before. And it's a novel question. So I don't know. But before she says, I don't know, she stops and goes, wait a minute. This is Ms. Black who's asking me this question. She's not going to set me up to fail. She's given me some hint of the answer, whether it's something to decode or whether it's comprehension or just a view of the inference to be drawn. Wait a minute. And it's not about pleasing Ms. Black if we're in a healthy place. Instead, it's about, I trust her. She's given me something to help me figure this out. And also, she believes in me that she would ask me this hard question. And so I trust her enough, and she's not worried about me being right or wrong. So before the words I don't know come out of my mouth, or before I just stop and ask for help before I write on the paper, something says, go for it. And let me take that deep dive back into my brain to try to assimilate all this information. And that's where brains change. But if you walk in a school and it is a school that, even at the receptionist desk, your mother is, gets the look because you've been late 3 times this week. A child who's asked that novel question 15 minutes or 3 hours later is going to remember her mom being humiliated at the front desk for being wrong by being late. She's not about to guess. She recognizes I'm in a place where I have to protect myself. And the way to protect myself is not be wrong. And the way to do that is by saying, I don't know.
Right.
And that place has no chance of doing the work for a child. And so being able to ask, what are you going to do to make my child safe, is one question I'd want to know. And of course, we're not. And they'll go, oh, well, we've got all the filters. No, I'm not asking about filters. I'm asking about my child as a learner.
As a learner, I like
it. And
excellent.
As an agent, ultimately as an agent for change.
I think that's an excellent point. So when we are, out in the community and we're talking to teachers, this actually happened to me. And this particular person is one of the reasons why I started this big advocacy that I'm on right now and forevermore, she kind of said to me, "Oh, that dyslexia is just a bunch of BS," is her exact words. And I thought to myself, lady, I'm about to smack you. But there are a lot of teachers out there who do that. They think it's a label. They don't think that it's important to dive into it. Just in closing, will you tell our listeners who are out there and they've had teachers who treated their children like that, or teachers who don't believe in this science, just tell them what they need to hear about it in a few
Yeah, I
words.
think the best thing I'd say is to go and I'd say listen to Marianne Wolf, and just from UCLA, read her book, Proist and the Squid, which is a weird title, but it's about research on the squid brains in the 1950s and about the French novelist. But um, I mean, those deniers would basically be members of the Flat Earth Society in other centuries.
Yes.
That point of view is so primitive,
Hmm.
and has been so disproven. You know, take an issue like climate change. I've got one view, other people have others, but and so you can say, well, on one side, but somebody who would question dyslexia as a thing, I mean, it is really several centuries behind. I mean, this it is just, and it really doesn't be beyond dyslexia. I won't say. I mean, there is a science again to teaching reading that if we implemented the science, we've got way too many children who are needing help and who are being, quote, labeled dyslexic. And we've got too many children in special ed right now because of we didn't create the kind of infrastructure and give teachers the kind of agency and expertise they needed. We've got a lot of children in special ed who don't need to be there. A lot of them, particularly for alleged behavior disorders that have nothing to do with behavior, but have to do with being in the schools that are defeating them because they aren't safe there to learn, because people don't know how children learn and how to teach them to learn to read. And children who are dyslexic just aren't being identified and are getting lost because of poor instruction. And I just don't know how many people who show up at our school in third and fourth grade and said, we knew something was wrong. And the teacher just kept saying, don't worry, it'll go away. It's not dyslexia.
That was
And I
us.
wish the teachers who were the deniers could know the suffering. And it's not only the suffering when they show up for us, it'll be a lifetime of suffering,
Mhm.
of feeling I'm not enough.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you change their hearts and minds. But if you're a parent, I just beg you on behalf of your child. And I guess I'd say this. This is the last thing I'll say because it makes me think of this. Um, just how cruel that denial is, and just how limited somebody's understanding of the science is. I get so many parents who will come by my office because you can see it's right in the front of our building. And after the child's been here, sometimes just a matter of weeks because they feel safe, or it may be several years, but will come by invariably and say, I just want to thank y'all and be in tears because my child's a different child. And I'll always push back and I say, absolutely not. Your child is just getting to be who your child was intended to be. And anybody who would stand in the way of that, um, and that stewardship it's really hard to consider that.
I
And
agree. I've
and
seen
again,
it.
it's really a matter for us as a society, um, to create this kind of overwhelming force, of resolve, as you're trying to do through this podcast, and authority for parents not to suffer under the weight of that. I mean, that's just unconscionable. But
Yes.
anyway, well, thank y'all for having me. I know I just talked on and on, but it certainly you can see. And people say, well, gosh, you're so passionate. And I really that kind of bothers me too. It's not passion, it's knowing.
It's education.
And the idea that what do we do to make sure everybody has access to the science instead of it being something that people have to acquire? I mean, there's no reason to have to acquire a right.
Well,
It's a
that's what
matter
the
of access.
dyslexia, I agree. That's what Dyslexia Jewels, we are all about. We educate parents, we educate population on this subject. And I think
Well,
you've done a fantastic job.
well, I will try. I've tried my best to be a diamond in the rough on Dyslexia Jewels, if you can pardon the pun.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we named it Jewels, because, we know that every jewel is different. It shines and sparkles in its own way. And you certainly shine and sparkle, Mr. Yates.
Oh, that's kind. Yeah, that's kind. I love that. That fits in with kind of that kind of shining and sparkling in the effort. I mean, the Michelangelo quote, when somebody went on and on about how he had created this beautiful marble angel. And, we don't have any video or audio of Michelangelo, but we do have the quote essentially. And I'm sure he was perplexed and said, I just saw an angel in the marble and kept carving till I set her free. I mean,
Oh.
that's our work here. And I'm grateful for y'all's pursuit of that liberation for other people's children. I know the power of that. So thank y'all so much. Okay.
Thank you for your time so much.
See y'all later. Jane, so nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.